Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith.
Whether it's a term used in passing or a purposeful agenda designed to usurp authority and power away from autonomous governments, the idea of the Great Reset demands our attention. Today, Donald Kendal of the Heartland Institute will join us to talk about the Great Reset and his new book with Justin Haskins and Glenn Beck, and how the idea of the Great Reset is being used to push through socialistic ideas through powerful structures like the World Economic Forum. With policy agendas too many to enumerate, the one overarching concern with the Great Reset is that it seems to capitalize on social unrest, fears, and social pressure for radical policy agendas. On the heels of a global pandemic, some leaders have suggested that this is the perfect time to reset the economy or the climate. But it's important that free-thinking people not give in to fearful and emotional claims that could change our economy and the state of our nation, but rather that we become even more informed about the Great Reset and what it really aims to do.
Donald Kendal, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
All right, so for those who don't know, Donald is the co-founder of StoppingSocialism.com. He's the Heartland Institute Chief Graphic Designer and Senior Editor. And Donald is also the host of the Heartland Institute's In the Tank podcast. So really excited to talk with you about a vast array of subjects here today, and I think everybody will be better off for it. So let's just start with something that's just like, I'm going to pretend that I'm my wife for a minute here with you, and I'm just going to ask you this question. You're the creator of StoppingSocialism.com. So what is socialism, and why do we need to stop it?
Well, you would think that that'd be a very simple question to answer.
Yeah.
But it's like depending on who you ask, the definition changes wildly. If you were to ask a person like Bernie Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez, they would suggest that socialism is just the idea of having, a public education system, or, this idea of Scandinavian socialism and just, having healthcare supplied by the government.
But I already have to interrupt and just ask this question, but is that honest? Is that true that that's all they think it is?
I think that a bunch of people that are sympathetic to the idea of socialism do truly believe that. Some of the more hardcore people, I don't think they actually believe that. And maybe I would put AOC and Bernie Sanders in that group. I'm not entirely sure. But the fact of the matter is, socialism is a lot more than just that. In fact, we've done a whole bunch of stuff specifically on these Scandinavian countries, because those are always kind of put up there as these poster childs of like the success stories of socialism. But in reality, their economies are very free market. In fact, the Heritage Foundation and some other think tanks just like us, they've done studies on this, and they kind of tabulate just like the different metrics that have to do with the free markets. And routinely, these countries like Sweden or Norway, they actually score better than us, the United States, in some of these free market metrics. Wow. So it's just like they actually have very free market economies. They just have larger social safety net programs like a universal healthcare system. So we deny the idea that that is an accurate representation of socialism. Socialism is actually just like it's instead of the free market kind of dictating where the scarce resources go and how to best use scarce resources. Instead, socialism kind of relies on the government. It relies on the government to dictate what products get made, who makes them, where the money goes, all of that stuff. So the real true examples of socialism are these horror stories like Venezuela or the Soviet Union back in the day, or a number of these other countries that have historically atrocious experiences when it comes to socialism. Sweden is actually an example of that. Back in the 70s or 80s, they really went hard into socialism, and their economy faltered, cratered, and it was free market reforms that kind of brought them back up to the stature that they're at now. So that's what real socialism is. It's really the government kind of controlling how the scarce resources are used. And that's actually one of the big points that might serve as a good foundation for the rest of this talk, is just the idea of socialism and its different iterations throughout the years. Because back in the Soviet Union days, like the Soviet Union literally owned the means of production. They owned the factories. They dictated where the products went. It all went through the government. But that's not how socialism kind of rears itself, over the course of its lifespan. So like I said, back in the Sweden, like the 70s or the 80s, they had these things called wage earners funds, which was basically any profit that was made by a company went into these wage earners funds that would be distributed amongst the workers. And it was basically a backdoor way to make these once private held companies to be partially owned by the worker. So it's this backdoor towards socialism. The Great Reset, I think, is a 21st century version of socialism that does not replicate the Soviet Union, back when the Soviet Union was doing its thing. So socialism is, it's a very abstract concept. So, that's why it's a little bit more difficult to say that. Sometimes in history, communism and socialism were almost synonymous. So, but basically it comes down to, the government dictating how resources are used and dispersed.
Yeah. I'm going to try to synthesize this the best I can, but I think if I were to say, especially people who maybe in my camp, I'm a conservative Christian, I think most people fall into two categories. One, they fall into the category where they're super, super concerned and afraid. And then they fall into the category of, well, they don't really even know what socialism is. And if we're just talking about social safety nets and, government programs, I'm cool with that, take care of the poor, especially if you're a Christian, you can pull on their heartstrings really easily with saying, people can't afford health insurance. So let's put Obamacare, which is total crap and doesn't help the poor anyway. But let's provide that for them. Because we want to take care of people. But I think the thing that ties those two things together is this undergirding philosophy and ideals that were in our founding, not to mention the horrific history of socialism. So maybe just kind of a side note, what would you say to the person who says socialism's never really been tried? Right? Those instances of, like, we always talk about Nazi Germany, but fact check, about double, if not more, people were killed by Stalinist Russia. So what would you say to the people who say, well, we just really haven't tried socialism and we want to try it here in America?
Yeah, my favorite response to that is this idea of, if you keep building a house and it keeps falling down, then maybe you're working off of bad blueprints, right? So it's like whenever these socialist ideas result in the deaths of millions of people. I mean, when you talk about the Stalin Soviet Union, like the mass genocide of like entire countrysides, because they would rather take the food that's being produced in these parts of the territory and redistribute it to the collective because it's the greater good, right? So, these millions of people that are starving to death, that's for the greater good. And you could see these examples in a number of different countries. China, for example, their one-child policy, horrific stuff here. Now, these ideas that, it's never really been tried. They either have, it's basically two ideas. One is that Scandinavian socialism idea, but that is basically, like I said, it's these safety net, social safety net programs that are being sustained by a vibrant free market. So that's clearly not socialism. I don't think that that's what they're talking about.
Well, and it should be added to that though, right? Like with an incredibly high tax rate, like in the 60% or something, right?
Yes. I mean, I mean, we can get into that if you want to, but everyone pays a ton in taxes on there. We can get into the standard of living between these two Scandinavian countries and the United States. But the other thing is that I think that some of these people think of when they're talking about, true socialism has never been tried. That's this utopian idea of socialism. And I think that's kind of what gets into this communist concept, which is like, there is no money. everyone gets what they need and everyone contributes what they can, right? That's that whole communist, to each according to their need, from each according to their ability, right? And that is a fantasy that will never happen. So what we're left with is these weird monster conglomerations of some, like some socialistic ideas and other, authoritarian practices. Like that's what we're ever left with. So this idea that it's never been tried, it will never happen. We're only going to see these terrible examples. The further you go into this collectivist, mindset, the worse it's going to be.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I will say, because this is like the biggest thing. I mean, I think you mentioned it while we were recording, or maybe not right prior to it, but this idea that it's like, these politicians that are proposing it can pull on the generosity, the heartstrings of your average person. There is a massive difference between me voluntarily donating my time or money for a cause that I believe in, and the government forcing me under penalty of law to, take 50% of my money, if not more, for whatever causes they deem necessary. There's a massive difference in there, and it's because of coercion. One's voluntary, one's coercive.
Well, I mean, at least we could go with the church. They only charge 10%, right? Okay, that's a joke. No, but seriously, so it's kind of concerning. So let's jump into something that you are very well familiar with, because I believe that right now we have a bunch of people who don't understand what's going on in our nation, and maybe don't even understand socialism, like we just tried to explain, which you did a great job with, by the way. And therefore, it's weird to them. There's just this overarching feeling, I think, for the vast majority of Americans, of just this weirdness, like we don't understand what's going on. I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy in the media, but I think there's even more to it than that. So it's like we see lockdown, stay at home, and then mostly peaceful protests over here where we're just like, hey, it's for the greater good, because this woke virus doesn't affect rioters and looters. And it's just like, so there's that. So that could just be chalked up to just complete incompetence and complete in the pocket of the Democratic Party media. But there is also this sense of like, well, like hopefully we're smarter than this. So what is like really going on? And is there something more at play here? If there's a missing piece to the puzzle that will help us understand what's really going on in our nation, why the sudden rise of socialism, why the rise of this new contingent in the Democratic Party and stuff like that. And that's where what you're doing with Glenn Beck and Justin Haskin comes in with the book that you guys are working on for the Great Reset. So I want to quote something real quick, because if there's a hotbed of democracy in the world, it's Canada. And I want to quote Justin Trudeau really quick. And then I want you to kind of tease out for us, if you can, what the Great Reset is. Because if you ask me, I think this is not just a conspiracy theory. This is something that is actively, whether it's kind of like you said, I think you were very careful, if it's something that's actively being done to try to implement socialism, or if it's something where people are just kind of trying to find a middle ground or something like that to try to help. But one way or the other, it's not going to work, because democracy is the thing, and the capitalist market is the thing that's gotten us in the position that we're in right now, where, whether you like it or not, ideologically, we're more prosperous than we've ever been as a nation. It's absolutely eradicated hunger around the world and all sorts of other things. So needless to say, so here's this quote for what may be happening behind the scenes, and why there's such weirdness with some of the things that we're seeing on the news media. So this is Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. He said, "This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts, to reimagine." Now, we're already hearing important words here: reset, reimagine, and that this is things that they were trying to plan before the pandemic, and now they're capitalizing on the pandemic. All right. So, to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like, now here's some more buzzwords: extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change. Now, even as a layman, so I want the expert opinion here. Even as a layman, when I read that, that's very unsettling to me. Not to mention Bill C-16 and all sorts of other stuff that's going on in Canada. And you guys at the Heartland Institute are at kind of the epicenter of, as a conservative think tank, about things like this. So I want to hear what you have to say. What does he mean when he's talking about a reset? And when he's talking about rejiggering the economic systems that exist in our world?
Yeah, I know of that quote. It was actually the thing that caused the Great Reset to finally start trending on Twitter, and it really turned conservative sites on it. So Justin Haskins and I, we kind of pat ourselves on the back for being a little bit able to see what the next step is, right? Instead of just reacting to the outrage du jour of what's going on today, we kind of like to look a little bit down in the future and what to expect in the future. So some of the seeds of this, we actually talked about in a Glenn Beck book that we worked with, the one that came out in April, Arguing with Socialists. And we kind of saw some of this coming. And it was quickly thereafter that book came out that our sights got turned to this Great Reset thing. And we've been talking about it since June. And it was Justin Trudeau's comments just like a month ago that actually seemingly pushed our message through into the mainstream. So let me follow that quote up by Justin Trudeau with a couple of other quotes. So this is from Klaus Schwab, who is founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism. Here's another quote from Secretary General of the United Nations. The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. We must build more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies and societies that are more resilient in the faces of pandemics, climate change, and many other global changes we face. And I've got several more here.
Well, can we just stop real quick and I just say, wow? Really, we have to take some time because the news cycle is so fast these days and information is just coming at us like nobody's business. Not to mention our thumbs are constantly on Instagram and Facebook. Can we just stop for a moment and just say, that is insane. That is crazy that we're sitting here having these conversations and that these men are out in the open saying these things. Now, my sinking suspicion, and that's why I started with socialism, is that this is a backdoor for socialism. But I don't want to jump too far ahead. I just got to stop and say, guys, we got to pay attention to this. We got to think about what these people are saying, not just hear it.
Well, and that is exactly what got our attention. Justin Haskins, he calls me up. I think it was back in May. And he's like, have you heard of this Great Reset thing? I said, no. So he's like, well, listen to all these quotes. And he starts reading off these ones that I'm talking about. Klaus Schwab, Secretary General of the United Nations, person from Executive Director of Greenpeace, Prince Charles, some people of the International Monetary Fund, all using the same language, all talking about this Great Reset. So that's what raised our antenna on all of this idea. So we started looking into it, and yes, it is absolutely a backdoor towards, I guess we can call it socialism. Like I said, that term is kind of abstract as you look at it throughout history. But it's no doubt they're not underselling it. This is a kind of a globalist plan to overhaul the way the economy and in turn society acts, how it's structured. But yeah, they use all of these different, buzzwords, I think you called them. Instead of talking about socialism, they talk about shareholder capitalism. Instead of talking about government spending, they talk about investments. Instead of talking about government mandates, they talk about private sector involvement. So all of these things, when you dig into it and you actually sift through their plans and their literature, these statements are not underselling it. It really is an overhaul of how society operates. And you mentioned my podcast, In the Tank podcast. We cover public policy. So I can get into some of the details of this stuff and really show you what their plan is. to how to manipulate the economy and society. And it's pretty astonishing when you get into it. But there is no doubt, like, how alarming it is. The amount of people that are in on this, seemingly talking from the same playbook. I mean, you even have, and I can get into this as well, Joe Biden saying some of these same things, John Kerry saying some of these same things, Al Gore saying some of these same things. So yeah, it's absolutely something that we have to pay attention to. And you're right, it's difficult for a concept that's this big and complex to kind of fit into that soundbite news cycle, that's totally focused on just kind of that outrage du jour instead of like these bigger things going on.
Right. Before we dig into the weeds with some of that stuff, I think I want to just step back for a moment and just kind of ask you about the way in which this is being implemented. So, I think it was Rahm Emanuel who said, "Never waste a good crisis," and we've heard like other Democrats, and I see you shaking your head because you're like, "Yep, we've been there." And you've talked about this, so people need to check out your podcast, obviously, and listen to go a little bit deeper. But for the sake of my audience, I'm just thinking to myself, this is what first comes to mind for me, is that we have these politicians. Even Hillary Clinton, I believe, said something, if not the exact same thing. Don't quote me on that, but the idea that we never want to waste a good crisis, and that now, while America is down, the rest of the world is down because of what is inevitably a global crisis for every single person. And, counter to popular belief, Donald Trump didn't create this virus. He's not responsible for the deaths of this virus. Fact check, it actually came from China last time I checked. But the point is that, like, so to now, at this time, be using these things when we're at a weak moment to try to capitalize on them is a kind of frightening thing.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this is the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdowns associated with it, the crippling of the economy due to the lockdowns, not necessarily the disease itself, but the government's response to the disease has definitely opened the door to this type of radical restructuring of the way that our economy works. And I actually think that this is something that they've been going for a while. And instead of COVID, which obviously just came up in the last year or so, they were trying to use climate change as their justification for an overhaul of how the economy runs. Right. And that was kind of proven by the concept of the Green New Deal. And I'm in this, this industry, that talks about, public policy nonstop. So the Green New Deal is super familiar to me. Not sure it's super familiar to you and your listeners here, but that is the AOC proposed legislation, $95 trillion plan over 10 years to take us away from all natural gas and fossil fuels, and instead,
and clean burning nuclear energy.
Right. Get away from that. Instead, strap us to the wind and solar power. But then it also included things like universal healthcare, jobs guarantees, free college, pretty much anything under the liberal wish list. Right. And I always was confused by that, because it was like, if you were really sounding the alarm on the world's coming to an end and we have to stop it at all costs, why would you spend 1 second or 1 penny trying to get something like universal healthcare, right? It seems like we have bigger fish to fry than trying to bog down the debate with those types of things. But what was revealed during all of that, I believe it was AOC's, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's, like secretary of something. And he said, "Oh, you were looking at the Green New Deal as an environmental thing? We always looked at it as a changing the entire economy thing." Yeah. So like that to me was the biggest illustration of this idea that they were trying to use climate change as this justification to overhaul, the economy and society. That has failed to work. We know, just with the Heartland Institute and our focus on climate change policy and energy policy, that when it comes to like priorities, especially during election years, climate change is like near the bottom. Like, not a whole lot of people think that that's the most important thing. So these people that are pushing these agendas have seen that climate change has kind of been a failure when it comes to using it to justify these. COVID-19 has blown down the door. They have been able to get more stuff enacted using COVID-19 as justification than they could have dreamt with climate change. So yeah, the Rahm Emanuel quote, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste," that couldn't be more true when it comes to this COVID-19. And you could see that in these quotes by these World Economic Forum people and the advocates of the Great Reset. They continuously use COVID-19 as justification for radical change or whatever they have to say about the economy. So there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, so that dishonesty is the thing that I think is the most unsettling thing. It's a hard feeling to put into words, but I think it's a feeling that all of us are feeling, just kind of this inward ickiness of just uncertainty and weirdness, because it doesn't seem it doesn't seem right. It is dishonest if these guys are doing that. So maybe this is unfair, and you've been incredibly fair. I love the way that you're trying to kind of push aside just outrage and get to the facts. I love that. So maybe it's unfair to try to question the motives of somebody because that's maybe something that we can't really know. But when we have a dishonest tactic being used in order to try to do something that they say is good, it leaves you wondering, is there more to the story than what we're seeing? Do you know what I'm saying? Because so like the thing is that, like, okay, so you're using ecology and you're using global warming as a way of just kind of trying to get across some policy ideas. But those policy ideas, they're benign, they're for the betterment of the people, and we're just trying to do the best thing that we possibly can at any cost. But that's an unsettling thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, think about if the Green New Deal were to pass, and
Right.
this idea of like a federal program for free college was passed because of the threat of climate change. It's like,
Right.
how do those things connect to each other? So yeah, it's definitely this idea that they're using, the alarm of one thing to push a further agenda for
Yeah.
for the liberal agenda. But the Great Reset, I mean, we've probably talked around it quite enough. I think we can probably get into exactly what it is if you're interested. But
Please do.
the Great Reset is a proposal by the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum is I mean, I brought up UN. It's a similar kind of concept. It's this, global organization that has input from academics, CEOs, business leaders, political leaders, all of that stuff. You might be most familiar with it. They're the ones that host the yearly Davos meeting in Davos, Switzerland, where they bring in all of these people and have talks about this, that, and the other. But so the Great Reset is a proposal by the World Economic Forum to essentially overhaul the economy and society and how it's structured. And there's two main parts of this. The first part is they want to create a massive global network of social programs. So this is like the Green New Deal, the jobs guarantee, universal health care, everything on the progressive wish list. That's kind of like the given, okay? Like that's actually the least crazy part of all of this. The larger part, in my opinion, is their plan to kind of create change how corporations operate. And the biggest thing, and this might be where I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but they have this concept of ESG scores. So this is environmental, social, and governance standards. This is a concept that's been bandied about a lot, especially when it comes to climate change. But the best way to think of it is like the Chinese social credit score. Are you familiar with that?
No, but I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, so one of these things that was going around probably several months ago was the Chinese social credit score. And that was like the government giving all of its citizens a social credit score that you get points taken off depending on if you broke the laws or caught jaywalking or going on websites that you're not supposed to or anything like that. And depending on your social credit score dictates your level of freedom in that country.
Wow,
Whether or
okay.
not you can buy.
And this is actively being done in China.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Wow.
they've got a couple of different pilot programs, but it's specifically big in the western portion of the country where they China has a problem with the Muslim Uyghur population. I mean, that's a whole nother topic. We're talking about labor camps and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically trying to use these metrics to give a score to citizens. This ESG thing is like a Chinese social credit score, but for businesses. So they would, and the World Economic Forum actually has this plan of what this ESG metrics would be already on their website. We've looked through it in length on one of our podcast episodes. But basically, instead of businesses being judged on profit or whether or not they provide a good or service at a reasonable cost to consumers that like that product, instead of being judged on those standard free market principles, they would get a ESG score based on gender and race composition of their governing boards, greenhouse gas emissions, ecological sensitivity of their supply chains, workforce diversity, gender pay equality, community investment, total number and rate of new employee hires during the reported period by age group, gender, and region, and literally dozens, if not 100 other metrics just like this. And then these businesses, depending on how they score on all of these different metrics, they have an ESG score that gives them more or greater accessibility to different investments, government funds, anything like that. So instead of a business being judged based on how good of a business it is, it's being judged based on how good it does with these social justice causes and climate change things. So that's kind of the heart of this. So instead of like the individual consumer being the driver of the economy, it's instead this elite board of people that are constructing what these ESG scores are composed of. It's a total separation of free market towards something that, to me, resembles more of a 21st century socialism that's being judged by some board of elites.
Right.
That's what the Great Reset is.
Wow. So what obviously, if China is buying into this kind of stuff, what real power does Davos have and the people that gather there to implement this beyond maybe just the communist China regime, or maybe you could come up with a couple of other here and there? Is it a threat to America, I guess, is probably the biggest question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we have a couple of things going for us in America that usually, European countries are more of the canary in the coal mine. Yeah. And we can kind of see where we're heading based on what's going on there, but we always seem to kind of lag behind that. So we do have that going for us. However, the thing about this, especially because of the World Economic Forum and how it's kind of positioned itself, it has buy-in from major U.S. corporations, specifically like MasterCard, Microsoft, all are buying into this Great Reset, this ESG structure of judging businesses. So we're actually further down the line than you would imagine. So the best way to look at it and how it would actually be implemented. So this comes from a World Economic Forum article. It says, the second component of the Great Reset agenda would ensure that investments advance shared goals, such as equality and sustainability. Here, the large-scale spending programs that many governments are implementing represent a major opportunity for progress. So then the author lists off a bunch of like these expensive recovery plans, COVID recovery plans that are going on in a number of different countries. Rather than using these funds, as well as investments from private entities and pension funds to fill the cracks of the old system, we should use them to create a new one that is more resilient, equitable, and sustainable in the long run. This means, for example, building green urban infrastructure and creating incentives for industries to improve their track record on environmental, social, and governance metrics. So this just flat out says that, let's say, the CARES Act, the trillions of dollars Recovery Act that was passed in the United States, that money, under this proposal here, that money would go to businesses that have higher ESG scores disproportionately.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the way that all of this is going to be carried out. It's through the government printing presses. If the government is giving you money shouldn't you be contributing to these collectivist goals that we can all agree on, whether it's combating climate change or addressing some of these social justice things? That's the way that this is all going to come to fruition. And like I said, with the Green New Deal, I mean, that failed miserably. They did not get that passed, right? Because again, climate change isn't highly ranking when it comes to priorities on people's lists.
We're not that ridiculous yet.
But COVID-19 did blow open that door. And like I said, trillions of dollars right off the money printing presses just being poured into the economy left and right. And this is suggesting that in the future, when it comes to any other additional government spending, and I suspect that it'll be more on climate change in the future, that it should be directed disproportionately towards these companies that have, or corporations that have higher ESG scores. Yeah. So this is the way that they're going to try to control society moving forward. It's by, when you've got trillions of dollars being poured into the economy by the government, suddenly the government becomes the most important customer to these corporations. They care less about whether or not you're buying, one of their computers or something. But if they can make sure to get $10 million from the government being poured into it, that's where they're going to turn their concern to. And that's why I think that some of these big corporations are buying into this.
Yeah, it's a full embrace of nanny state. They're going to say, like, if we're going to be the nanny state, then we're going to give you a report card and we're literally going to be your nanny.
Absolutely. And then think about this. Because to me, this is, now maybe this is a little bit more the conspiracy side of me, but, this concept of the ESG scores, there's nothing about that that's set in stone, right? It's always subject to change. What's stopping future versions of this ESG scores to incorporate free speech things? Whether or not it's tech companies allowing what they label as hate speech, or what if it has something to do with the Second Amendment? What if you get a very lower ESG score because your credit card company has some business dealings with some firearm manufacturers? Yeah. So, I mean, they haven't suggested this as of yet, but what's stopping that from being part of this ESG metrics in the future?
No, I think that's, I think that's an important point. To be honest with you, it has been a little bit of my concern that, here's conspiracy theory number 2, maybe 15. I don't know where we're at this point, but, it's been my concern that the Black Lives Matter movement has a potential for the same kind of thing in this regard. They're coming for the police today, which by every objectifiable standard is not systemically racist, whatever that even means. I had a conversation already earlier today with somebody about why I believe systemic racism is a cleverly designed term to do absolutely nothing except exploit black people. So that's a loaded suggestion that I won't even go any further than that on. But simply to put, I'm not even saying this about necessarily like the Patrisse Cullors of Black Lives Matter, but just in terms of a slippery slope of what Black Lives Matter is suggesting and how the media is using it as a tool right now, rather than to actually literally help black people. Because it's very clear, the vast majority of African Americans in our country don't even want the police defunded. They want the police more in their area to help them out more. It's specifically not to truly help black lives. I mean, Don Lemon was about the most honest person you possibly can be on this when he said, well, it's not about all black lives, it's just about black lives that are affected by the police. So, I mean, it's just that it's like, and all I'm saying is I'm not trying to open up a can of worms. All I'm trying to say is that there's this slippery slope with all of these things. And my concern as a Christian has been, you're coming for the police today with bogus evidence. What keeps you from coming after Christians? Because the left has already been very, very, very obvious with what they think about Christians for the vast majority of their tenure. And they think that Christians are bigots. They think that Christians participate in hate speech because we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and you can go on and on and on. So I'm just thinking to myself, okay, so now is the ESG card coming for Christians?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, again, what's stopping them adding different metrics on in the future? I mean, whether it's attacking the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, or go down the line, like, I really don't know. I really don't. And that to me is like the scariest part of it. Like the list itself is just nonsensical if you go through it. And this is from their website. But yeah, like what's stopping that list from getting even worse or more draconian or authoritarian in the future? You know, especially when the justification for it right now it's the COVID-19 to kind of carry out some of this stuff. But in the future, when they're talking about the world's going to be coming to an end because of climate change, it's like, what's more important than the world coming to an end? If the world's coming to an end, that could justify anything, absolutely anything. So
Right.
yeah, if a system like this gets put in place, absolutely it'll get worse and worse as it goes on. There's no way that it's going to get better. And once a system like this gets in place, it's impossible to get rid of.
Well, which is a page from the playbook of socialism, if you ask me. I'm not an expert like you in it, but it sure seems that baby steps is how you get socialism, and it's always with a promise to help people, but it ends up backfiring. All right, so with that being said, I think the obvious question that a lot of people have as they're listening to this is gonna be, how come we are not hearing anything about this from the mainstream media? And so I have a little bit of a theory here, and I want to take just a minute to explain it. It's my theory that, we're talking about kind of this return to normalcy campaign, unity under Joe Biden, and all that stuff now that he's the incoming president. And it's my thoughts that that really the media has been at their game for a long time. So it may get quieter under Biden, but it was exposed under Trump. But it's been something they've been doing for a while. In fact, and the doing here is lying to the people and trying to maneuver the country in a direction that they see fit through narrative. And so it's my thoughts that they tried to do this in 2016. My thoughts are the only reason they gave Trump the press coverage they did is because they thought to themselves in their elitist mindset, there is no way on God's green earth, and we mean green, there's no way on God's green earth that Trump is ever going to be president. So we're going to pick a candidate on the right to lose so that Hillary Clinton can win. That was my thought about 2016 in the election. That backfired on them. And so they were very, very careful in 2020 to try to make sure that they were controlling the narrative yet again in a different way to make sure that Joe Biden won. So it's my thinking that I said all that to say this, that it's my thinking that the mainstream media is in the business of shaping the direction of this country and trying to influence it with zero apology. Now, there may be good actors doing this because they believe it's right. And there may be those who are nefarious doing this. I'll go ahead and just be fair and say I'm not the one to say that. All I can say is that anybody with a brain can obviously tell you the mainstream media cannot be trusted. They are dishonest and they're at something. So why aren't we hearing about the Great Reset from these sources of information?
You know, I would love to come up with some explanation that kind of gives the legacy media or the mainstream media a pass on this. I would love to suggest that this is all due to the kind of soundbite nature of just your standard press. You know, it's kind of hard to explain all of this in a 3-minute segment before you have to jump back to commercials, right?
Right.
I would love to explain it away as, you know, the media is too clogged with just kind of the outrage of the day to focus on something big like this. I would love to give some explanation like that, but I am going to go in the more nefarious thing. I know that we called it the mainstream media. I like to call it the corporate media.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there is corporate buy-in to this plan, you know, whether it's Microsoft or MasterCard. A big segment of the people that are invited to these Davos things are heads of media. So I think that they are playing a role in this, a very important PR role in selling this to the public. And I think that we actually did a poll on this. We commissioned a poll. The Heartland Institute commissioned a poll with Rasmussen reports specifically on the Great Reset and socialism in general. In fact, it's just being released like this week. And it shows you that the more people know about the Great Reset, the less likely they're interested in it. So I think as of now, their game plan is to kind of sweep it under the rug a little bit and kind of dress it up with some of these words of shareholder capitalism and investments and things that people are fine with, and try to just kind of sneak it by. That's my best guess with this. And like the New York Times wrote an article like a few weeks ago talking about the conspiracy theory that is the Great Reset. And they don't really dispute any of the points that I've made on this podcast so far at all. They just blanketly call it a conspiracy theory that conservatives are concerned about. They don't give any other explanation or try to quell any of my fears or anything like that. It's essentially just like a PR thing that they did. It's just label it a conspiracy theory and let's move on and pretend like it's not happening. That's my kind of cynical approach to all of it.
Yeah. I think that's right. And I hate to say it this way, but time will tell, right? But in the meantime, we need to be supporting and looking into the things that the Heartland Institute is putting out about this stuff, at least for nothing else, to inform you, because podcasts like this that are trying to fill in the gap for the replacement media and what you guys are doing is so important so that we can hear the things that we're not hearing.
Yeah, and this is actually why I wanted to kind of tease this up front, but whatever, I'll just say it now. But I'm actually very I'm optimistic actually about all of this that's going on because of this poll specifically, but because of some other stuff that's going on. I think that our that poll that I suggested shows that the more people are familiar with this concept of the Great Reset, the more they reject it. Mm-hmm. So us at the Heartland Institute, stoppingsocialism.com, we've been pushing this since June. We've gotten coverage of it in whether it's the Glenn Beck show and all of the different Blaze shows, Fox News and Tucker Carlson has talked about it. I think Laura Ingraham has talked about it. We talked about it on different articles that are posted at The Hill. Like, we are pumping this stuff out there. And one of the findings of this polls that we took is that conservatives are actually more likely to know what the Great Reset is compared to their liberal counterparts. So we think that shows that our push to get this information out there is actually being successful. And not only does the poll show that, but it also shows that the more people know about it, about what the Great Reset is, the more they reject it. So I think that as we continue this push, and as we continue to pump out material on this, and like you mentioned at the front end of this, we're working on a book with Glenn Beck specifically about the Great Reset. So I think that once we raise the awareness of this, I think it will be soundly rejected by the American people. So I'm actually pretty optimistic about this. And I do know that the World Economic Forum, we're on their radar. I can't really say too much about it for various reasons, but I know for a fact that we're on their radar, and I do believe they're flinching because of our coverage.
Well, good. And what's the name of that book? Because I want people to go out and get that when it finally is released.
It's going to be called The Great Reset, some subhead. I'm not sure if that's completely finished at this moment, but
okay.
The main title of it will be The Great Reset. It'll be, authored by Glenn Beck, co-authored by Justin Haskins, who works with me, and stoppingsocialism.com co-creator. And I believe the plan, and it's a pretty tight window that we're trying to thread here, is to try to get it out in the first couple of months of the year. So it should be coming out pretty soon. You'll start seeing advertisements about it in the next month, I'm sure.
Great. That's awesome. I want everybody to go out and make sure they get that. All right. Before we go, I do have another question, and it's kind of going to seem that it's on a different subject, but it's very native to what we're talking about already. When we're talking about the news media, when we're talking about being informed, and when we're talking about the more informed people become, the more they don't like specifically the Great Reset. But also I've heard Justin speak about this to some degree, but I'm wondering too if you could kind of fill us in on the digital New Deal, because as we talk about information, I think your optimism is shared by me to a high degree, because I think the more the mainstream media is exposed, especially now that we're at home and we're looking for information and we're seeing how much they're lying to us, I think it's caused people to kind of scatter and look for information from alternative sources. So I do share your optimism in that regard, that if a well-informed republic can truly be trusted with their government, then hopefully as people look for alternative means of information, they can become more informed. But of course, the thing that's on everybody's mind today is the fact that there are other interests that are trying to keep people uninformed. Now, you think specifically about Joe Biden and what happened with his son. It's Russian disinformation during the election cycle. Now, it's a story for the legacy media because the FBI has been investigating him all along. So forgive me for my sarcasm. But so what is the digital New Deal, and why do we need to be concerned about it? Why does it need to be on our radar?
Yeah. So again, like I kind of mentioned up front, is we like to try to look a little bit further down the road and kind of see what are these concepts that are coming out. And hopefully we can kind of snuff them out before they get too big, right? And I think the digital New Deal kind of fits in that as well. So the digital New Deal is this concept that's been created by the German Marshall Fund, which is a non-governmental organization. It's very well funded. It's headquartered in Washington, D.C., $165 million in assets. It actually gets funding from different governments across the world, if you can believe that. They do have some ties to international organizations like the World Economic Forum. But essentially their plan, it revolves around the different kind of code of conducts that are, that you see on Facebook or Google or YouTube or Twitter or anything like that. Removing certain stuff, putting those little labels on there when Trump tweets about the election, all of that stuff, stifling conservative speech, anything that you could possibly imagine when it comes to kind of the big tech cracking down. And they are proposing, under this banner of the digital New Deal, the creation of a new agency in the US government called the Digital Democracy Agency, which they basically want to create a standard across the board for all social media, or just anything on the internet, even like comment boards or anything like that. So we can kind of standardize the practices and the code of conducts across all of them. And they say, the government agency, this new government agency, won't actually be in control of dictating any of these codes of conducts. Like, that'll be up to, somebody else to kind of put all of this together. But the government will be able to play a role in playing as a backstop for compliance with industry's best practices. So it's basically taking if you look at it in the most cynical way, which I always do when it comes to any type of government practices, it's like taking all of the worst aspects of the way that big tech has treated its content, or specifically conservative contributors, and trying to standardize it across everything. So, whenever you see like these big bans on Twitter, you always see Parler as this alternative that's being proposed. If you don't like the way Twitter is treating you, just go to Parler and they'll, right. You could say whatever you want on Parler, whatever. If this were to be enacted, it would force Parler and any other alternative to these big tech things to play by the same rules and to have these codes of conducts enforced by a new government agency. So it's a terrible idea, basically. It's a way.
So does this thing have a chance of seeing the light of day?
Yeah, right. So, if anything that you are skeptical of or unhappy with the way that Google or Facebook or YouTube or any of these tech giants, act, the Digital New Deal and the Digital Democracy Agency would enforce that across every platform on the internet. That's the plan.
Well, so my question was, do you think that this will see the light of day? Do you think that this actually has a chance of actually going anywhere?
Okay, so again, in America, I think we have some other safeguards. I think we have this innate love for freedom of speech And I know, obviously there's some exceptions to that rule, and there's plenty of people that would, you would say wouldn't fall into that category, but we're the only country that has it, right? We're the only country that has the First Amendment protection like that. But the thing is, these giant social media companies and YouTube and Google, they're international. So if something like this were to play out and there was enough of a international pressure that they have to potentially deal with as a company, it doesn't matter that there's nothing like it in America. They'll just play by the same rules, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a million examples of this. There's different countries that have certain hate speech laws that Facebook has to abide by, or else they'll get a fine from Germany or something like that.
That's right.
So my concern isn't necessarily the United States adopting this digital democracy agency. It's that it gets a foothold in enough of the rest of the world where it doesn't matter. That's my biggest concern. And I do believe that that's a bigger likelihood than it happening specifically in America.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's just where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's been enough going on with these social media companies already with the suppression of conservative media, and then how many times they've been drug in front of congressional hearings, which are just ad nauseum. I mean, I feel like the best form of suicide would actually be to watch those things. And because they accomplish so very little. There's some sound bites and stuff. There's some clips. Yeah. Yeah, and they usually typically solve nothing. But the point of them having those is because there's already concerning trends in social media, specifically with what I already said. Case in point, you need nothing further than just the Joe Biden and his son issue with China and taking money and all sorts of other things. So it is concerning. But I'd like to share your optimism here too, and just say, well, we've seen, hopefully, time and time again, that freedom is an incredibly fragile thing. We do right to be concerned with it. But also, our Constitution is incredibly durable. So I'm optimistic as well, too, that our Constitution can withstand some of this barrage of attack that's coming its way, specifically with social media and the suppression of information, which is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, just like the fact checking that that we just have to abide by when it comes to any number of topics, like the Heartland Institute and climate change. We can't even put out a YouTube video without having some disclaimer under it talking about what we have said in the past about climate change. So all of that would just be standardized across everything if something like this were to pass, and it is frightening. It is a little bit. It's very concerning for sure.
So that being said, that's why people need to be tuning in to the kind of stuff that you guys are doing at the Heartland Institute. So let us know real quick where we can find you. Give us the website for Heartland, and then let us know how we can find you on your various podcasts.
Yeah, heartland.org is kind of the main site for the Heartland Institute. We cover public policy from everything from energy, climate change, down to school choice, budget and tax issues, healthcare. The project that's specifically targeting the Great Reset and socialism is the Stopping Socialism Project. You can go to stoppingsocialism.com and find a whole bunch of content on there. On different social media, you can find us on everything. Stopping Socialism on Facebook, Stopping Socialism TV on YouTube, Twitter, we have a Parler account, Instagram, pretty much everything you can find us. And then, you could always, email me for more information, dkendal@heartland.org, or just reach out through Parler or something like that.
Okay. Well, Donald, thank you so much for your time today, man. It's been incredibly informative. I think everybody who's listened today will come away with not only some information, but a little bit better off as a result of our time today. So thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me on anytime.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.